Thanks for tuning in for today's live Q&A. Today we're going to talk about how to get rid of ants and the small hive beetle. So let's just start with the beetles now. Small hive beetle can be a bit of a pain. They've been introduced into Australia and many other countries, and they're in your compost, they're in the environment, they're everywhere in most parts of the world. And they're just a little black shiny beetle. Now, they're not usually a problem for a hive that is strong. Lots of bees will corral them into the corners and not let them lay eggs around the hive. But you can get into a situation where a hive is weak, and if you look at this hive, by opening the windows, you can see that it is very weak. I can't even see a bee there right now, but we know that the hive is okay. It's just lost its queen a while back, and now it's got to build up again. So when it's in that stage of building up again, that's an opportune time that the beetles can take over, and you can see them in the cells here. Got a bit camera shy and ran away there, but the bees will often put them into corners, down empty cells, and with the flow hive you can actually see them down the cells. And that's the bees just herding them into a place where they then can't lay eggs in the comb or in the brood. So what we're going to do is activate the pest management tray down the bottom here, and that'll catch a lot of the beetles, give the bees a hand while they get back on their feet and build up. If we don't catch some of those beetles, we risk them laying eggs in the brood nest down here or in the honey, and it turning into a beetle nest instead of a bee hive. It's called a slime out, and you get lots of beetle maggots sliming their way through, and it can be the end of that colony. And it's a bit of a clean up and annoyance, and then you've got to start again. So first of all, let's have a look at this tray down here, and there's a beetle right there actually, so that's handy. We can show you what one looks like. So it's running around there. They're roundish in shape, they're shiny, and they're just a little black beetle that look quite harmless, but in numbers they can lay enough of their own eggs to cause a colony to slime out. They're not necessarily a first stage problem though. It's usually you've got another problem where your colonies become weak, and that's given the beetles the opportunity to take over. So all we want to do is give this tray a clean, and here's one I've prepared earlier, and we're just going to put some cooking oil right in the tray. So this is just regular cheap cooking oil. You can use used cooking oil if you've made some chips or something, or if you run your car off old cooking oil from behind the chip shop like I do, you can use the old oil. So all I'm doing is pouring a little bit in each segment. It's a bit like an ice cube tray here, and all we need to do is cover each segment. You don't need to fill the tray up. So just making sure that the oil is covering the bottom surface, and that's sufficient to catch a lot of beetles. So now, doing this in the morning is a great time, because there's a little risk of bees coming up under the screen before you put this tray back in. So what you want to do is have a quick look under there that bees haven't actually run up and clinging to the underside of the screen. If they are, you might want to take your bee brush or a bit of foliage and just brush them away before you put your tray back in. When the bees are really busy, that can happen, so best time to change this oil is early in the morning when the bees aren't going to do that. Okay. Now I'm simply just sliding that back in. Now, you want to create a good seal from bees. You don't want the bees getting up there, because they will also die when you do it. So it's important to then push your ventilated cover. I'm going vents up, so a bit of ventilation, but you could also go the other way out in this weather. And I'm just making sure it's pushing all the way in. That way it creates a seal between this and the tray underneath. It doesn't allow bees to get into that area. Wind your wing screws all the way around so they're holding it in there, in that position. And come back later and you'll find that you would have caught a whole lot of those small hive beetles and given your hive
Sorry, Sid, we seem to have lost sound.
Okay. Sorry about that. I've lost sound again. Here we go. Okay, we're back again. So now we've got the oil in the pest management tray. We can come back later and we'll find that a whole lot of the beetles would have gone through our screen bottom board and be down in the oil trap below. So it's quite effective and a good use. The next thing we're going to do is activate our ant guards down the bottom here. And the reason why I'm doing that is because I noticed some ants were just behind the window here. So ants are a cosmetic issue. They don't really bother the bees, but they bother us because we want a nice clear window. We don't want all the ants and muck when we open the window. So what we want to do is brush them away with our bee brush or a bit of garden foliage. And it's a little bit of process with ants of brushing them away, activating your ant guards, brushing them away again, and it'll take you a couple of times to get rid of them, but it's a little bit of persistence and they'll go for the time being, and they probably won't come back for a while, and then next time you see them you can then activate your ant guards down the bottom again. Next thing, look under the roof. There's often a whole lot of ants hiding under there. Brush them away too. And also this area here, you can see the ants are making a nice little home there, so you'll be brushing them away as well. So once we've got rid of most of the ants there, we can then go and fill our ant guards. Now they're not going to be any use as an ant barrier if there's foliage actually touching the hive. So we're going to also clear away any foliage that is touching the hive, and that way the ants can't use that as a bridge to get onto the hive. Okay. Now next we're going to wind these down here to give us plenty of space, and that one up. So now we're going to pour some cooking oil into this area. If you've got one of the little sewing machine oil bottles, it does help a lot, but in this case we're just going to fill a lid full of oil and tip it into that area. So lid of oil like that, and we're tipping it into there, and that fills up that little ant guard and creates a nice barrier. Now the rain will wash the oil out. If you want something that lasts a bit longer, then you can use grease. A white grease is nicer than a black one, like a Vaseline. So we're just going to go around and fill up all of these little ant guards with oil, and that should create our ant barrier. If you've got any questions, put it in the comments and we'll start to answer them. We've got a little bit of rain here, but we'll push on. Also let us know whereabouts in the world you are and what the beekeeping season is like for you. So we've got some oil in there, and we'll go around and do the front legs too while you think of your questions. Any questions there, Trace?
Yeah, there's quite a few questions coming in, Cedar, and one of them is that one, Theron's saying sometimes the oil, and I guess I've seen this in my own hive, starts to grow a bit of mildew or it looks like mould. Is that a problem, or do you just got to keep cleaning it out?
Okay, so if that's in your oil tray, then you can, just clean it out. That'll be perfectly normal because you've got a whole lot of debris falling through into that tray area. And the oil is food for different life forms as well. So it is a matter of just cleaning it out. One thing, if you're in a warm climate, you can use soapy water instead. It doesn't last as long because it tends to evaporate, but it's a lot easier to clean. So you might like to try that if you're finding the oil is a bit hard to clean. But yeah, a strong hose or a pressure washer will blast that muck off your tray. Lucky last. Okay. cap of oil and in the front like that. Next, what we're going to do is wind those caps down. Now, the reason why we're winding them down again is they are a rain cover. So this is coming down like that. Now, if you've got small ants like this, they'll go all the way down, and we've designed it so it'll stop with the right gap. Sometimes with larger ants that can step across a bridge, you'll leave them slightly higher up. So just like that will help keep the rain out and the oil in there longer.
Great. See, this one today you're doing the pest management on is the Flow Hive 2 Plus. Quite a few people are tuning in, have classic hives and wondering how do they sort of deal with the ants and the hive beetles with the classic hive.
Okay, so starting with the beetles, somewhere we've got a video of how to make a beetle trap using a fluffy surface. If you go to a textile store, you'll find the tablecloths used in some takeaway stores. That kind of material has a fluffy underside, and you can stick it with some double-sided tape to your core flute slider, and that can make an effective beetle trap. The other thing you could do is get shallow Tupperware containers and push them in there in between the core flute slider and the mesh, and that will serve as an area where you can put some oil and trap some of those beetles as well. And with ant guards, you can make your own just by putting blocks underneath your hive into a tray of water. So some people do that as well. The other thing you might like to try, because this is an easy one, and you can simply get some cinnamon powder and throw it behind the covers here, and that will often deter the ants a bit. You might have to do it a couple of times, but they don't like cinnamon powder. However, you do get this cinnamon powder all over your frames looking a bit dusty, so you might have to clean that off again later.
Oh great, yeah, a few people are talking about the cinnamon and it seems to work really well, I've found as well, so that's a good thing to do. Another one, see, that comes in quite a lot actually, and we have a few customers who do this, so people who have the classic and they want to add the legs to their classic so they can use the ant guards, but maybe we could talk a bit about that, but basically you can't do that, you'd have to buy the whole base and stand to make that work.
Yes, the way this stand is designed, it's integrated with this base area. So you'll need to order a base kit from us, and what you'll be assembling is everything below this line. So you've got your pest management tray, you've got your ant guards, you've got your aluminium leg stands and adjustable leg bolts. And that will be something you can then put under your classic hive and gain those features if you want them.
Great. G from Insta's asking, I think the ants drop out of the tree above, and wondering what they can do about that, and that's when they've heard talking about the success of the cinnamon.
Ah, okay.
Drop bugs.
Yeah,
drop ants.
It's not drop bears, but it's drop ants. Yeah, we have these jumping ants at home that drop out of the tree onto the trampoline. I think it's just because they like to jump. But yes, I guess ants could drop out of the tree, but you're not going to get near the numbers, because what tends to happen when you've got ants that have a way to get to and fro is they set up shop here, and they actually creating a nest with their eggs and everything like that. So you're probably less likely to get them setting up in that way if they're just a few ants dropping onto the roof of your hive.
Matthew saying, unfortunately, he's in the red zone for Varroa here in Australia and was going to harvest the honey and needs to store the flow frames. Just wondering what your suggestions are for storing those flow frames, as it might be for a few years.
Okay, sorry to hear that. It's a bit of a sad situation there in the red zones here in New South Wales. What you'll need to do is, well, ideally you can store them in a deep freeze, but if it's going to be a long time, perhaps you want to clean them up and put them away dry. Now there's a few ways to do that. If you've still got time, you can open the frames, harvest the honey on the hive, and allow the bees to clean up the actual flow frames before you take those flow frames away. It's when you're storing them with honey on them, you'll get the mildew and so on. If you want to store them with honey on them, then you'll need to put them in a deep freeze. If you get them dry first, then you won't need to store them in a deep freeze. So to do that, you'll need to wash away the honey, which you can do with a hose or a pressure washer, and then you'll need to leave them out in the shade to dry, and then you can store them away.
Right, now, something I'm not sure now because my microphone, but Steve, you might want to repeat my question.
You need to come closer because I've got your mic.
Yeah. Oh, there's always something going on.
Yeah.
Okay, Kathy's asking, can you apply, and I never quite know how to say this word, diatomaceous earth at the base on the dirt or mulch to help with these ants?
I guess you could. One thing I think, and I'm not that experienced with the diatomaceous earth, I think when it gets wet, it doesn't work. So if your hive were under a roof, that could work well. And it's the same with putting it in the tray. Some people like to put it in the baseboard, but if you get a lot of driving rain pushing water in the entrance, that will make that diatomaceous earth wet, and then it's unlikely to be useful. So for that reason, we tend to go for the cooking oil in the trays.
Yeah, and that's Leanne sort of tuned in on that one as well, saying that has the Araucaria with the core flute, the classic hive, and has hive beetles and is trying to keep a layer of the diatomaceous earth on it, but not having that much success with it.
Yeah, okay. That's good feedback.
Yeah. Now Brendan, of course, is asking, see, we did that myth busting ages ago with the mint lollies, wondering how that went.
Okay, we did do a follow-up on that, and there was more beetles than there were before. So unfortunately, on this test of one, it was a fail. So according to this test of one, it is a myth. But if you think otherwise, then do some tests, put it out there, let's get some feedback and find out whether we were unlucky or whether it is a myth indeed. And if you've got things that you'd like us to do some myth busting on, then chime in, let us know.
This is a good one. Ivanman saying, do people with hives on rooftops have less hive beetles?
I would say yes, because they do breed in the ground. However, they do have wings and they do fly on the wind, and they'll follow the scent of a nice smelling beehive. So while beetles might come to the hive, you're likely to get a few less because you don't have that the full circle happening right near the hive of the larvae going out into the ground and turning into beetles and coming up again and so on.
Reese is asking, Cedar, how do you get the bees to clean out the flow frames? Do you just leave them in the hive or do you put them at the front of the hive?
We do not feed honey to bees outside the hive. We don't want to create a robbing mentality with your bees and spread pathogens around. So you do that inside the hive. So you'd harvest the honey and then come back in a few days and hopefully they've licked up a lot of it and there'll be less for you to clean up to store those frames away.
Nice. Now Chris's question, it's saying my bees are bedding, so was thinking of adding a super between the brood and the flow to give them some more room. Thoughts of doing this in autumn. Do you think they mean a different super?
Okay, yeah, any kind of super, it wouldn't matter, but in autumn, they're less likely to swarm in autumn, but you sometimes do get a late swarm. So my tendency would be to say no if you think there's not much of a honey flow coming up, because you don't want to create, depending on where you are, if you're south here in Australia in the colder regions, you don't want to create unnecessary room for the bees to keep warm. So therefore it might be a better idea just to leave the colony as it is for the winter coming. If you're in the northern parts and it's subtropical or tropical all year round, then you could go ahead and add another box to your hive. So you could add it in between or you could add it on top, just to create some more room. Another thing you could do is take a split from your hive. That also depends where you are in the country and what the climate is for you there.
Terry's saying the ant guards in the cinema made a huge difference in solving their ant problem that they had.
Ah, great, excellent, useful. So I'm jumping the gun a little bit here. Have we caught any beetles yet? Not yet. Oh well.
Oh, this is good. Debbie's saying, I've been spreading charcoal ash from our fireplace around the base of the hive, which has been really effective with the beetles and the ants, and now experimenting with coffee grounds.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Excellent. Yeah, let us know how that all goes. Charcoal ash for beetles.
Yeah.
That's a new one.
Which is often good in your garden for stopping your snails from eating your cauliflowers and things. So
There you
yeah,
go.
it's a similar kind of thing. Jerry's asking, did a honey harvest on the weekend, had a few hive beetles in it, but when the honey came out there were little, like hive beetle, little, look like maggoty grub thingies. Is it all right to still have that honey?
Look, it depends, and I think your taste buds will tell you if it's tasting too much like fermented honey. So if it's far gone and there's been a lot of beetle activity, then you probably, the honey will be tasting sour. If it's just got a few in there, then honey is nice and antibacterial, so you can just let those things float to the top and scoop them off. But what it's telling you about your hive is that you've got quite a lot of beetles in there that are being left to lay eggs. So keep an eye on it, activate your beetle trap. You might want to do a brood inspection to just make sure that there's not a slime out occurring. If you do get a slime out occurring, then what you'll need to do is take away all of the honey frames from the edges of your hive, take the super off and reduce the work that the bees need to do to just a central brood nest, and put empty frames back in either side. And that way your bees will have the best chance of getting on top of the beetles, trying to turn it into a beetle nest.
Oh, great tip. Another question from Terry saying, wondering if you have any theories on why their bees have become aggressive. They're in northern New South Wales, positioned near a paperbark plantation, saying they're going to leave them for a while, but just wondering if you had any thoughts on what might have changed that.
So I have heard that certain types of nectar can make the bees a little more grumpy. Now, that really does, I'm not sure if that's true or not. Chime in if you've got answers to that. But I think it's most likely genetics. So what happens is you can have a nice gentle hive, then one day your hive decides they want to replace the queen, or the queen died for some unknown reason. Now, when the new virgin queen that they hopefully will make goes and does its mating flight, they'll be mating with potentially 30 or more male bees, the drones, from all sorts of hives in the area. So you then get a mixture of genetics from all around, and if some of those hives have really aggressive traits, then they'll bring that into your hive and you'll get some more territorial bees. So if that continues to be a problem and it's too much to manage with aggressive natured bees, then requeening is what you'll need to do. You need to get in there, take away the old queen, and a day later put in a new one that you've ordered from a queen breeder, and hopefully you'll have nice calm genetics and you'll be back to a gentle hive again. So if that process is too challenging, then get a hand from an experienced beekeeper to help you get in there and find the queen.
As Maria's asking, I'm not sure, so a couple of questions. One is, how do you clean up the flow frames outside of the hive, which you sort of answered before, but also do bees clean up any mould in the flow frames?
Okay, the bees are pretty good at cleaning things inside the hive. What they're not good at cleaning is the propolis, because to them that's a fine coating on the cells. So you can have a look here, this frame is an older one and there's propolis building up on that, and you can see the brown waxen propolis on there. Now, to get rid of that, if you want to clean that, then you'll need to use a pressure washer, and even better, a pressure washer that's got connected to a hot water service and can blast nice 70-degree hot water on those frames to wash the wax away.
Oh, this is a good one. Unboiled Frog from Toowoomba said they did a full hive inspection on the weekend and no noticeable hive beetles, and also they'd had chalk brood about 4 months ago and that all seems to have gone.
Fantastic. Yes, your bees are capable of getting rid of chalk brood, and it's a pathogen, and it depends on the hygienic traits of the bees. If you find it persistent, then one of the things to do is to actually replace the queen, and hopefully you get genetics next time that are better at cleaning out those chalk brood mummies in there and stopping the spore cycle that can go on. So that's good news, well done. And beetles don't seem to be a problem as you go into the drier areas. It seems to be more of an issue in the humid, wet places. So you probably won't find beetle issues out there at Toowoomba.
Oh, that's good to know. Reese is asking about the one wanting to remove the super. How long will it take for the bees to clean up those frames? Is it generally a couple of days and then he'll be able to take it off?
A couple of days would be about the right amount of time, and then you can take those frames away, and any remaining honey in there you'll just need to wash away, but all the frames should be uncapped. Actually, if there's not a whole lot of activity in honey float, you might need to wait 3 or 4 days. I was just having a look at this hive here. Now, we harvested this last week, and have a look at this. There's not a honey flow at the moment, so they haven't been in a hurry to remove the capping. And while they've removed it from most of the frame, you can still see they've left some there intact. They know it's empty, but they'll get around to removing that as needed when there is a good nectar flow and they're wanting to store a lot more honey. So that's neat to see. They've repaired all of those other cells. They're all covered in wax, ready to go again, and they've just left an area there, which some bees are still slowly working on here. You can see them chewing away.
That's so good, isn't it, to see it like that after we'd just harvested last week?
Yeah, sometimes they'll rip all of that and repair all the cells that same day, but that's more when you've got a honey flow on and the bees are very active.
Oh, nice. Cedar Melody's asking, can you use a half-height Langstroth box? Will it fit on the flow hive?
So you can add more boxes. The sizing fits more or less. You'll be out by a couple of millimetres probably, but generally it's something that you can do. So some people will add what's called a medium, which is about this big, and they'll put it between the two boxes. In the colder areas, this can be common as it's a good storage of extra honey for the long winter to come. So you can also go and add another one on top. However, then you've got an issue of the roof might not fit, and it might just be then perched on top of the hive a little bit. So it'll fit over the inner cover and then sit there. So there's a few options for you there, but by all means mess around, go ahead and add more boxes to your hive. I wouldn't do it until they've taken to the flow frames and they've really started to store some honey though, or you'll just get a little impatient waiting for them to do that.
Well, this is a bit sad. Mrs. K, new to beekeeping and ordered bees online. They finally came and they all arrived dead. It was very disappointing for a first-time beekeeper, and saying now that they will purchase locally from now on. And then Jimmy's neighbourhood bees has tuned in and said that sometimes the post will keep them in hot vehicles for hours. So that may have been the problem.
Oh,
that's a sad story.
That's a bit of bad luck.
Yeah.
I wonder if they spent a bit too much time in the post. So you can order bees in the mail, which is an amazing thing really, because what beekeepers do, or bee breeders, is they'll make what's called a package. It's an artificial swarm where they will get bees from the brood nest, shake them into a container that the bees can't get out of, but it also needs to be well ventilated. So I would check, if I was you, whether the package that arrived was well ventilated. If it was completely surrounded in plastic, then the bees would have starved of oxygen. And that's a really important thing in transit. So you've got two things that need to you need to do in order to look after bees when they travel. One is they need ventilation, they need a lot of oxygen, and the other one is they need to be kept cool, not too hot. So if either of those things happened, it got too hot or not enough oxygen, then that was probably the cause of those bees dying in the post. So I would contact the bee breeder, let them know what happened, and they'll probably help you out getting another colony going.
Yeah, Ruben in Mexico, Seeds is wondering, what do you recommend for varroa mite treatment in Mexico?
Okay, so I'm not an expert in varroa mite. You might want to tune in on our thebeekeeper.org channel there, and there is experts from all around the world created high quality training material there, including mites and how to deal with them in various different methods. And also a shout out to people out there, let us know what you would do in Mexico for your varroa mites. Now, people's strategies vary widely, so you'll get strategies of people going more for genetics that deal with the mites, and other ones where people are using more organic treatment like the oxalic acid, and then there's more chemical treatments as well. So you've got a bit of a range, and you'll need to decide for yourself what you need to do. The first thing to do would be to check on your mite levels, and you can do that by making what's called a sticky board and poking it in the bottom and counting the mites. Generally, if you've got more than 10 or so mites falling through that screen bottom board onto your sticky mat in a day, that means you need to do something about the mite levels in that hive and treat them. So let us know how you go, and if you've got some good methods, please chime in.
GB's asking, the newest hive seems to have some honey in the channel before they've harvested. Got any hints on why this may have happened?
Okay, yes, it's a common thing, and here we go. Here's an example. You can see it right here. So just depending on the way the bees seal up the flow frame parts, sometimes they don't do as good job, and you get some honey coming through and collecting in this area. Now, we designed it so that that honey would go back to the bees rather than build up, because if you're in a warm climate, then it could ferment. And if you're in a cold climate, it also could go candied in that area. But bees will be bees, and they've blocked up our little point there. Now, when you harvest next time, it will unblock that area, and the remaining honey after you harvest will drain back to the bees. But in the meantime, there's a few things you can do, and if there's a lot of honey in there and you suspect it might be fermented, then just take that out and insert your tube and drain that away, and that'll unblock that leak point for you, and it will also discard that honey out of the trough area. If it hasn't been there long, and you can tell that just by tasting it actually. So this honey here tastes fine, so I'm going to let that go back to the bees. Now, you can see here the propolis they use to block that leak back point across here. Now, simply by turning that around, you can often crack that seal, and that honey will drain away back to the bees, and I can see it actually just above the key there, draining back into the hive. And if you watch closely, you'll even see the bees' tongues licking into that area. Now, if that doesn't work by spinning it, then what you need to do is either use your harvesting tube to unblock that, or you can use something like the end of this flow key or a stick or something, and you're just unblocking that area at the bottom there, and then back in with the cap, and that should solve the problem. Now look at this, somebody's put this cap in the wrong way around. I haven't seen that before. It's a new one. I suppose it doesn't matter too much.
How did it even happen?
Here we go. Let's just turn that around. There we go. Best with the handle outside. But hey, that kind of worked.
Yeah. So it's Ben's asking, do all our hives work as one colony? Because would opposing colonies could potentially become hostile?
Bees can squabble with each other, but it's more if you start suddenly mixing up bees from this hive to the other by just sticking this box on top of that box and it's half full of bees already. Sometimes they're fine with it, and other times they'll actually fight, and you can see them wrestling on the landing board and trying to rip each other's wings off and so on. So it really depends on the bees whether they are going to fight with each other. But if they're just like this next to each other, or even right next to each other, then they actually won't fight. They'll stick to their own colonies more or less. But what can happen is you get a bit of drift from one hive to the next. Let's say there's a strong wind, bees come flying back from foraging with a full load of pollen and nectar, and they can't be bothered flying back up to the end of the row because they're so heavy and so tired. They'll just go into the next hive here. Now, if they come loaded with gold, they've got nectar or pollen, then they'll be let in the door. If they come empty-handed, then they'll be seen as a robber bee, and there'll be a fight at the entrance. You can get into the situation where you've left some honey out, which you shouldn't do. The bees have got a taste for honey instead of flower nectar, and they will actually go and steal a honey from a weak colony. So this might be a colony that could be affected because there's not enough bees in there to really defend the entrance, and another hive that's got a taste for honey might come and steal any remaining honey in here, which could be the demise of the hive. And if you see that, then there's a few things you can do. The first thing is to reduce the entrance size and make sure that the hive has the best chance of defending itself. And you can do that just by sticking some mulch in the front, or you can use our entrance reducer, which is made for that purpose.
Right. So what is the plastic used on the flow frames? Is it just regular plastic, or what type of plastic is it?
So that's a food grade polypropylene. We put a lot of effort into making sure we had the very best food grade plastics, and it's one of the widely accepted ones in all of the food packaging that we use today. So once the bees have used it for a while, it also gets coated in beeswax. So your honey is then sitting inside a beeswax pocket in the cell, if you like.
Nice. Now here's a bit of another. Terry's got lots of questions this morning. Here's another question from Terry. Has 2 flow hives and each one has 2 brood boxes. All the frames in the brood boxes are very full and I want to extract the old honey. I'm in northern New South Wales, so plenty of warmth. My plan is to take 2 honey frames from each box, which will leave 6 full frames in each box. Do you think this is a good idea? I have fresh frames ready to go. I have loads of honey in the super as well. It's been a very fruitful year. So it sounds like they're going to hire an extractor from a bee club to get the honey out of the brood box and then put the empty brood frames back into the brood box.
Absolutely, you can do that if you want to. I got sick of the conventional way of harvesting long ago, and that was the I guess, catalyst for getting going on inventing the flow frames. But it's a good experience. If you haven't done it before, then go and do it. Hire an extractor, go through that process of harvesting the conventional frames. As you say, you've got another box full of conventional frames. You can go ahead and harvest those. The other thing you could do, if you don't want to go through that process of decapping and spinning and filtering your honey and so on, is you could just harvest them for honeycomb. So you might like to just cut some of that comb out and take it to your next party on a plate with cheese and blueberries and whatnot, and everyone will be very impressed, and you'll get great conversations about bees all night as well.
Ruben's asking, what's the closest distance you can have your beehives next to each other? They're thinking ours are about 3 metres apart, so it's probably even closer than that.
Yeah, we've just got ours about just over 1 metre apart here, and that's fine. And in fact, you can put them right up against each other. If you see the way the commercial operators do it, they'll get the hives and put them on a pallet. They'll be 4 to a pallet, and they'll be wall to wall, and that works fine for bees as well. so you can put them closer. However, this is a nice distance. I wouldn't go much closer than this with a flow hive, because it's nice to be able to see in the side windows here, and also to work the hives individually, to stand up here in between them and to do your beekeeping and brood inspections.
Nice. Now Matthew's asking again, so you might not know this, is Flow Hive heading to the Bee Expo in Sydney next month?
Okay, I won't be there, but it'll be a great thing to get to if you're in that area.
Yeah, I think we actually have, and I think Bettina's organising this, some ambassadors and resellers will actually be there representing Flow, so we won't probably physically be there. Well, Cedar won't be.
I won't be there myself, but there should be some representatives that you can go and ask questions about flow hives and have a look at the technology.
Can you harvest propolis from the flow hive?
So we don't have a gizmo in there for harvesting propolis, but if you do want to harvest propolis, the way they do it is with a mesh. So if you get, say, some tough fly screen, the metal type, for instance, and you put it in here above the, or right under the roof or somewhere in the hive, you'll find the bees will want to stop the ventilation through that. And they'll do that with their propolis, just by gumming up all of those little parts in the mesh. You can then take that mesh out and melt out the propolis. So that's the kind of way it's done if you want to mess around with propolis harvesting. It is a nice antibacterial product that's used in a lot of medicines. You can also just get a little bit, if you want to, from around the edge where you take the hives apart. You'll often see a brown seam that the bees use as their glue, and you can scrape some of that off, have a bit of a chew on it, and it'll often taste quite resiny. They'll be collecting resins from the local trees. If you've got pine trees around, it'll taste like a bit of a pine flavour, and there'll be generally a strong kind of flavour to it. It's like nature's chewing gum.
Nice. Kazakh saying lives in the desert, and where the winters are not that cold. Just wondering whether they would need to remove their flow super in the winter time. On those winter questions.
Okay, if it's not that cold, then you can just keep it in the configuration like this. Now, it really depends. We're in a subtropical region here. We live in this configuration year round. We do get some frosts in this area, but it's not really a long cold winter in that you'd be removing the honey supers off the hive. But if you are in a really cold area that gets many months without any flowers, then the first thing to do, or the minimum thing to do, is to remove this queen excluder. And that means as the bees that are balling together and bunkering down for the winter move up to consume honey in the top box, the queen can come with them. If the queen excluder is there, she'll get stuck below and perish, and you'll start the next season without a queen. But you can, it's typical in colder areas to downsize your hive, give them a bit less area for them to keep warm. So if you've got multiple boxes on your hive and you're in a cold place, then it's typical to take some of those off and reduce the size for your colony for the winter.
Eric is saying they did an inspection on the weekend, and a few of the frames were stuck together. I think they're talking about the brood frames. The hive is nice and flat and level. Is there anything they need to do, or will the bees just sort it out themselves?
So, not quite understanding that question. The frames were stuck together in the brood box?
I think so. I think they're talking probably cross-comb in the brood.
Ah, cross-comb.
Yeah.
Okay. So the bees won't sort that out. They'll just carry on doing their artistic patterns. So what you'll need to do is do your best to separate them. Now, if you've got comb that's gone completely sideways between a couple of your brood frames, what you may need to do is actually cut them apart and actually cut the sections of brood out and use rubber bands to hold that back into the frame. And then they'll connect it more back up where it should be, straight along the comb guide. If it's on the edges, it's likely to be just honey in them, and you can simply take that comb away, enjoy eating the honeycomb, and give them another go at making straight comb on those comb guides.
Any ideas, Cedar, why Manuka honey is so expensive compared to just the regular honey?
So Manuka honey is amazing stuff. It's from the leptospermum species that actually came from Australia to New Zealand.
Oh, that's controversial.
Okay, well, a long time ago though, so it's naturalised there. It came with birds, and we have a lot of those species around here too. So you'll now see people marketing Australian versions of the Manuka honey, and it's got an incredible property that in some cases can heal wounds that things like antibiotics can't. So it actually gets used medically and gets used for its medicinal properties. So that's why it is so expensive. It's also a bit harder to extract because it's often has a thixotropic property. So you're a jelly-like structure, and you'll see it here in these hives sometimes because we have some of those species around here, and you'll see blobs of jelly-like honey coming out into the jar, and that's the thixotropic properties of the leptospermum polygalifolia, which grows around here natively. And there's a few other species too that have that jelly-like property as well. So it's an amazing honey is the answer to your question, and they export to the world out of New Zealand and Australia, and it's gained a great reputation for its wound healing.
Fantastic. We've got Beck saying that we're having problems getting the bees going into the flow super, but had lots of honey in the brood box, so has moved a frame up from the brood box, and hoping to encourage the bees to go into the flow super. It's going to keep us posted on that one. So we've got everyone doing their little experiments out there. I love it.
Yeah, I've found the best thing is wait for your bees to build up and that to coincide with a great nectar flow, and then they're very quick to get going on the flow frames. Another little thing you could do if you want to muck around is scrape some wax off the top of your brood frames and just use the hive tool to mash it into the flow frame surface. You won't damage the flow frames. Put it on the window side and you can enjoy watching them recycle that wax in that area and get some activity going on the flow frame right there in the window. They still won't store any honey there until there's a good nectar flow and you've got a decent amount of bees in the box. So if you've got other boxes on, reduce the size of your colony as well. Take other honey supers away and just put it in this configuration, and that'll massively speed it up too.
Nice, and this is just a little, we've got Jeremy in Texas saying, wanting to order some hives, Jeremy, and you've been trying to get hold of us. Just ring our customer support. I'll be on the phones in about 20 minutes. Leave us a message and I'll call you back and get that sorted for you, so don't worry about that. Now Karen's saying did an inspection of brood boxes and used an egg carton in the smoker, as recommended by some local beekeepers. The bees were angry straight up and it was not a good experience. Just wondering, what do we use in our smoker?
Okay, that's interesting. I actually used an egg carton for the first time in my life yesterday in a smoker because the mulch was damp, and I just looked for the closest piece of cardboard I could find as a replacement. So using some cardboard, as you say, egg carton, can be a replacement, but using something more organic would be better. Just some garden mulch here. This is sugarcane mulch that we've used in the garden. Underneath the hive it tends to stay a bit drier, so that's often a go-to spot if it's been raining, is to look for a little bit of dry mulch. Pine needles are a great one too. So we have pine needles just over here, and we can pick up a lot of those. They're very easy to light and an easy one to use. However, they don't last so long. So often at home I'll be getting some pine needles to get it started, and then going to something with a bit more substance, like the bark from the tallowood trees, which are right near my hives, and I'll jam that in the smoker, and that'll last a very long time. So to me, it's what you have around. You don't necessarily need to go ordering things to put in your smoker. Just use dry leaves if you have them, garden mulch, or try different things, as you say.
Nice. Seeds, have you got any plans, you or Stu, of heading back to the USA? We've got a few people wanting to meet you.
Ah, okay. One of these days I'll get over there again. And my nephew went over there recently, and you might see some of the footage he took as he travelled around, even as far up as Alaska, and filming some wonderful beekeepers there doing their honey harvests and talking about bees. So stay tuned for those Meet the Beekeeper episodes filmed in the US.
Nice. Angela's asking, the bees have been a little traumatised lately after her hubby accidentally bumped the hive. So they've just had to reduce them into a nuke and re-queen. So thought now would be a good time to repaint the hive and do a bit of a freshen up. Just wondering what's the best way to go about this, just a paint and a light sand, or what would you suggest?
Okay. So I imagine that must have been bumped right over, because I can't see them getting traumatised by just bumping the hive. But yeah, sometimes if the hive gets knocked over and is left over for some time, you can lose a bunch of bees. Now, in terms of you've got an opportune moment to dress up your timber, then what you could do is use a sander if you like. Let's say it's gotten really mildewy and you want to bring it back to looking like this. Then you can either push in the screws a bit further or take them out altogether, and you can actually sand the surface and start again. If you don't want to go to the trouble of that, then you can use a product called oxygen bleach, which will tend to take the mildew away. Then what I would recommend as a final coat, and what we're having good luck as a long-lasting finish, is the decking products. So find a water-based deck coat from your hardware store, and they're designed to last a long time in a very harsh environment outside on timber. So that's a bit of a tip there in terms of what to put on it to last a long time. Or of course you can go ahead and paint it, and have fun with the family, painting some nice patterns on your hive as well. And that's just using outdoor house paints to get a long-lasting finish on your hive.
Nice. Chuck's tuning in on that air carton one. Seeds maybe the air cartons, because you know you can get air cartons made out of cardboard and different types of material. Maybe it was a different type of carton.
It's hard to know, and that's one of the reasons why if you know, sometimes burning cardboard or egg cartons or whatever, you're introducing some chemicals in there that might not be good for the bees, or as you say, they might not like it. So using things like garden mulch and leaves is a better idea. But sometimes you just caught out, everything's wet, and you just need to find something to put in there. So interesting learning there.
Yeah. 5 Acre Farm, who are in Victoria, saying they've got the new flow hive, all excited, and just wondering, should they wait to put the bees in spring, or does it not really matter what time of the year you put your bees in your hive?
Okay, so it really depends on how much season there is left. So if and ask your local beekeepers this question, because they'll know what type of nectar is available to your bees during that time. So here we could go ahead and pretty much start a colony any time of year. We sometimes are taking splits mid-winter because there's a good amount of forage around for them in the winter time here. But in your area there might not be. And as you say, it might be good to get all your equipment set up and ready and install the bees when the weather warms up again. The other way you could go, if you really want to get a jump on it and get started, is you might be able to purchase just a conventional hive off somebody that already has a lot of bees in it, and you could do a swap out into your flow hive. So just simply transferring the brood frames into the bottom box here. So that's another way you could go if you want to speed up and get a jump on it. So you've got a large size colony when the spring rolls around and the flowers come out.
Nice. Jamie, the crystal guy, who's in Wales in the UK, has got a flow hive and getting excited waiting for the nuke. But I'd heard a few people from there suggesting maybe the flow hive may not work in that area, and then another person's tuned in, GT, saying it may be problematic with the harvest because of the heather and the ivy. Do you have any thoughts on those?
Okay, so my father travelled around Europe, and it's interesting that for some reason when we started, the sentiment was it won't work here, and we're like, well, we have tested it in Europe and it works well, and and so he was confronted by lots of people coming up to him and saying it won't work here. And so he ended up putting up a sign saying, it does work here. And that changed the kind of conversations that he was having. And I'm not sure where that sentiment came from, but it seems to have held, even though we've got plenty of people in Europe, people in Wales, people in Scotland, people in the UK. We've got Jamie Oliver showing off his honey harvests. Still that sentiment stays there. And I would say, don't be put off. Get your hive, get it going, and you'll find it works well, just as well in Europe as it does here. Now, the second part of your question is about the heather honey and about the ivy honey. Now, I suspect that the ivy must be thixotropic as well. I know that the heather honey is, and that's that jelly property I was talking about earlier with the manuka type honeys. Now, if you get a 100% heather honey in your frames, it won't drain out because it might set like that thixotropic properties of that honey do, and it's hard for it to flow. If you get a partial amount of heather honey, then what you'll find is it'll come out in globules like it does here when we've got the manuka type flowers flowering. It's not a major problem. It just means that if some of your frames get heather honey in them and it goes thixotropic and it's set in there, then you try to harvest, the honey won't come out. You just leave that for the bees. And the action of actually operating the frame will usually stimulate them to uncap, take that honey out and start again. Hopefully something else is flowering. They've filled it full of liquid honey again, and you can go ahead and harvest. Now, having said all that, no matter what type of beekeeping you're doing, thixotropic properties of honey are a pain to harvest because they're set in the frames. If you go conventional, you take those frames out and you put them in a centrifuge, the honey won't come out either. And the way they do it with thixotropic properties of honey, like the manuka in New Zealand, is they will get the frame and they will take that straight from the hive to a warm room that's heated. Then they'll get what's a pricker, which is like a whole lot of little nails on a board, and they'll push that into the frame. And what that does is break the thixotropic property to being more liquid temporarily, and they'll take advantage of that time when the honey's more liquid. They'll put it in a centrifuge and spin it. Now you could do that with flow frames too, but you know, if you've got heather honey, it's going to, and you've got a lot of it, then you'll probably get used to it being a bit annoying to harvest the honey in no matter what way you do it. And the rest of the time when other things are flowering, you'll get the nice liquid honey you can harvest from your flow hive.
Great, and I think that's what Jamie's thinking. He's basically saying, yeah, we'll give it a go and I guess time will tell. But also wondering, do you sell the sign cedar? That's Stu.
Yeah, hanging on your fence. Yeah. The flow hive does work here.
This is an interesting one. Tabunda hives saying that they've used fiberglass resin to seal their beehives and have not had any problems.
Okay, that's interesting.
Surf on it too, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah. Okay. So you get a very, very nice shiny look there with a glassed resin finish. What I've been concerned about, because we've tried it with some really heavy marine lacquers, is it will last well for about a year, and then you get some water ingress coming underneath it, and then you can't do anything about it at all because you've got water tracking underneath that coat. But I have not tried fiberglass resin, so that's a good tip. Perhaps we should try that.
That's got it. And of course now I'd say it's a few people final questions. Oh, whoops, come back over there. Asking, have we caught any beetles yet in our beetle trap?
Oh, have we any beetles? Let's have a look here. We've started off with there was one beetle in the tray before, And the answer is no. We'll have a look next week and see if we have any beetles caught in that tray. And while we're here, we might go ahead and fill up the next tray as well. So a reminder, push that all the way in to seal the tray. So for those that are just tuning in, it was about ants and beetles. So it's pretty simple to use this as a pest management tray. Now give it a clean out first. That's the debris that's falling through from the frames. And you might need to give that a wash and a dry, or you can use some foliage to brush that away. I'm going to be lazy and just pour the oil straight in. More debris is going to fall in shortly anyway.
Nice.
What we want to do is just cover the surface like this. You don't need to fill it all the way up. You just want to make sure that these surfaces of the tray between the baffles are covered in oil, and then it's good to go in, and you'll trap a whole lot of beetles in there. So there we go. Now we can go ahead and slide that in, bearing in mind that if it's a busy time, there's a lot of bees, then they could have flown around underneath. Here we've got a nice calm morning, bit of a grey morning, they're not that active, there's no bees under there. Best time to do your pest management tray is early in the morning before there's a lot of bees that might fly around and under the hive and cling onto the underside of the mesh. If you do find they've done that, then you'll need to brush them away before putting the tray in, because they will die in the oil. Now insert this in and make sure it's pushed all the way in, and your wing screws are done up nicely to hold that in place, and that creates a seal between the vented cover and the tray, so your bees won't find their way into the oil. Thank you very much for tuning in. Let us know if there's things you'd like us to cover next week, or you've got a myth you want us to bust. So thank you for all of your great questions. If you've got answers to other people's questions, by all means chime in. That's what it's all about. It's about helping each other get started in this wonderful pursuit of